Okay, folks, access control. So this is I would call it a fundamental information security control. And it's just making sure that the right people have access to the information and the unauthorized users do not have access. So what that's going to look like in practice is a managed business process supported by certain technical controls, whereby you ensure that all of the access you provision up front is to authorized users. You have some reasonable segregation, meaning ideally some kind of an approval so that one specific actor can't just add access without some sort of check and balance, and that access is given at the right levels to the right folks based on something concrete, ideally their role, and that special access and privileged access is given the important consideration that it deserves and is put through a ticketing program or something like that, or tightly controlled in the way that makes sense for your organization. Backside, it's going to be disabling access in a timely fashion. And then sort of everything in the middle is going to be, as part of access, controlling the identity of the person as well. So those are the concepts. Let's just walk through the policy and talk about, what the language means and where we can change it, drop it, etc. Okay. So first section here, the access control policy. We're talking about the concept of least privilege. So what that is saying is that you're only going to give access where people, need to have it. So there's two closely related principles here. It's the concept of least privilege and need to know. They're kind of very similar concepts. You do not give access to things that people don't actually have a business need for. That is the principle you're striving for, to have a tightly managed security program. So for example, you're not giving your sales team direct access to your production database. You're only giving that to engineers, and ideally not every engineer, maybe just certain, senior folks or deployment folks, or ideally you have, some sort of an automated pipeline and you're not doing, any direct access, right? The devil's in the details, but you want to be able to defend all of the access provisioning you have, ideally in accordance with the concept of need to know or least privilege. Good. And so anything you don't expressly grant should by default be denied. That's another concept that supports that. Okay. And so the language here in the first part is just speaking to that concept. It can be tweaked or changed, but that's the idea. And then ideally it's going to be role-based. Well, why is this important? If you don't have role-based access, then you have to provision everyone's access individually. And you're going to have to either do something like ticket and approve individual access, which is like a heavyweight business process that you might want to avoid. Or if you can do it by role, then you can say, hey, like everyone in the company is going to get these systems, right? Like your basic stuff, your email, your business documents access, your payroll tool, your HRIS, basic productivity tools, something like that. And then you can say, hey, everyone who's in an engineering bucket or in a sales bucket or an analytics bucket, they're going to get access to these basic systems. And then you don't have to show, ticketed access for all of those things. You have a role-based scheme that you've enforced, and it can simplify all the individual approvals that you might need to show. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Privileged access to production infrastructure shall use MFA. This is not a hard requirement in ISO or SOC 2. If you absolutely couldn't do that, that is a place that you could change the language. However, in 2023, I hope that you can do that because, this is an extremely potent space for unauthorized access, and using MFA is just I would consider it like a fundamental tool now to make your position stronger. I think a username and a password only scheme, while maybe technically allowed, is just a very weak position to be in, and you have a lot of risk if that's all you can do to protect access.
Do you
Good.
have an example of a very basic like MFA kind of like, I'm going to call it program loosely?
Yeah. So, I mean, the most common MFA is like SMS based. So this is where you're getting like a text or, some sort of notification to your phone. But that's not the strongest way to do it. There's various risks, and you probably have heard about these in the news. So SIM swapping is one risk. So that's basically where a hacker gets enough information about you to impersonate you to your cell phone provider. They call, Verizon or AT&T, and they're like, "Hey, I'm Caitlin's husband. She dropped her phone in the toilet, and we need to switch your number to this new phone." You're working with like a phone operator, you know what I mean? And so if you can forcefully talk through it, you can socially engineer them and then get the number switched to their phone, they could potentially, bypass your MFA. So it's a much better than, not having anything, but there's other stronger things you can do. You can use an authenticator app, so something like the Google Authenticator app. You can get hardware keys. There's like a whole bunch of different levels you can do to do implementation. And then this is a little bit off topic, but if you think about, this concept of zero trust, where things are, where you're not going to have any trust relationships in your environment, you can start expanding the concept of identity even further by having certificates on your laptop, by testing whether your MFA device is in the same vicinity as your laptop through Bluetooth, by geolocation of your MFA device versus where you're logging in from. There's a lot of spaces where you can expand the concept of identity even further to make it stronger. But let's just start with MFA. So that's like really a basic thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Access to network and network services. This is, again, kind of boilerplate. We're capturing here the language of ISO, where they said, hey, don't give access to any of this stuff unless you have like a need to know. For most SaaS companies, this is sort of one and the same thing because you don't usually have like a network. But if you had various levels of provisioning, all of the levels of provisioning should follow this organized scheme so that you're, giving access to folks that you know need it and you know who they are, based on that account. All right. So we can scroll through here. All right. There's a little bit of talk about credentials and passwords being shared, root and administrator passwords, etc. So here's a couple concepts. Shared passwords are bad and to be avoided. That's a concept because of the thing called non-repudiation. So if me and Caitlin have the same access to the same ID, Vanta user at whatever, and we both can log into it, and then someone, hacks that account or does something bad with that account, well, was it me or was it Caitlin? Well, it wasn't me. It must have been Caitlin, but then she says the same thing. So now we have repudiation. We don't have a way to prove who was the actual actor in this situation. That is why unique accounts are so often emphasized in these security standards. You want to have unique accounts wherever you can. Well, problem with that, you have certain accounts like your root and your cloud, or even service accounts. So when systems talk to each other or applications talk to each other, they might use some sort of like generic system account ID to do that communication. And just as a common reality, often engineers have some level of access to these system or service accounts just to make them work, et cetera, get them set up, troubleshoot them, what have you. The TLDR here is you want to manage that stuff as tightly as you can. You definitely do not want people routinely logging in with generic service accounts. That should be, just like anything, privileged accounts and service accounts, the use of those should be restricted similarly on like a, need to know, but similar concept of like, hey, if you have to do this with this level of privilege or this account, then do it. But if you could do it with your regular user account, then you need to do it over there. Okay. And this is where you get into the idea of having like a separate administrative account from a user account. So if my user account is Matt at Vanta or Cooper at Vanta, I might have Cooper admin at Vanta as a separate account, so that when I'm doing my day-to-day work, I can use my regular account. If I were to get breached, that account only has so much privilege. It can't do as much damage as my privileged account. And then I only log in as my privileged user when I need to use that account. That is a best practice. There may be some language about that in this policy. That is not a hard requirement. So if that's too much overhead for you or you can't do that, you can take that language out. But that is one control that certain organizations use to reduce that level of risk around their privileged accounts. So the TLDR is you can have some shared accounts, like root is going to be kind of shared by default. It should be extremely tightly managed. People should not be logging in, to that AWS root account. And you can read through the AWS best practices and their pillars, and they'll talk about, best practices for how to use these things as well.
Do you need to call those things out specifically?
I'm sorry?
That example you just gave, like, do you need to call out specifically accounts which will have multiple people attached to them, or is that specificity not required, like in the policy itself?
Yeah, I would say that specificity is not required in the policy. Depending on the complexity of your organization, you may need another document like a procedure or a standard that does call that out, especially if you're a large org, so that the rules are very crisp and crystal clear. If you're a smaller org, you can potentially just have a scheme to manage that is defensible, which you can then show to your auditor, and you can keep the policy more at a policy sort of principles type of a level.
Got it. Cool.
Okay. So registration and deregistration. So ISO kind of nitpicks some of these things and breaks them out. So it's like creating your user account is registration, and then giving rights to that user account is, provisioning access. For a lot of folks, it's kind of the same step, but just understand that's what they're talking about here. So you need a, managed scheme for registering and deregistering accounts. This is another place where many companies will not allow you to reuse old user accounts for a similar reason. There could be ambiguity. If access was still left over, there was still work done under that old user, and now you reuse that account. Is it going to be confusing for how you provision new access or who did what, etc. So the best practice there is to not reuse old accounts, only create new accounts. Etc. Details. Okay, so I've talked about the concepts. You can tweak the language again to be right for you. I don't know if there's anything else in here that we specifically need to go over, Caitlin, but otherwise we can come back to it. The next big section here, obviously, then provisioning of the access. We've already, I think, talked about that. A privileged access. These are administrative accounts. Obviously, those could do more damage because they have more rights. And so you just want to be particularly careful and concerned about who has access to those things, right? So you're not going to make everyone an administrator in the payroll system, well, because that was easier than figuring out who needs what level of rights. That's probably the number one, bad reason why people are overprivileged. It's convenient. It's easier because then people can do their stuff, and they're not going to ask me for, I need more rights here, or there. So that's probably the number one cause for over provisioning access, is it just makes it easier. Everything works. But that's not, not a place you want to be when you're getting into a third-party audit type scheme. You need to just focus and put in the work to reduce everyone's rights to that, least privilege.
Is that something the auditor typically will call out? Like when we think about this policy, what are some of the top things an auditor will call?
Yeah. So the easiest way to audit this is for the auditor to just say, hey, just show me who has access to certain key systems, and you just look at it, and you can very easily do a gut check on that. You know what I mean? So if you pull up my AWS, production access, and it's 5 engineers, 3 of whom are, senior VP, whatever, that's probably fine. Sounds fine, right? Seems like a gut check. If you pull it up and there's 35 people on there and you're a 50-person company, it's geez, wow, that seems like a lot. Let's start talking me through some of these, right? Now, if you have 35 people and you're a 35,000 person company, well, then that might be fine. You know what I mean? And then also it's going to be, well, who's the users? If it's, Casey, Cooper, Billy Bob, like that gut check sounds fine. If it's, generic Vanta 1 is showing on your user list, that's an easy thing for the auditor to call out and say, like, what the heck is that? I mean, I have a kind of a funny story where we were doing this and they were checking the CI/CD tool. So this is a development, very powerful development tool as part of their code deployment process. Who has access here? And everyone was using nicknames. And they're like, oh, this person is this person, this person's this person. Who's Fluffy? And like the VP was like, quickly slacking the team, like, who the heck is this? It was slightly awkward and embarrassing in the call. It turned out to be, some whatever senior QA person who goes by Fluffy in their CI/CD tool, which is fine. But that's the way the auditor is going to typically check it. So you're just going to look.
Yep. Cool. Okay.
All right. Access reviews. So access reviews is kind of like an insurance process whereby, hey, you have a dialed process for provisioning, deprovisioning. Everything should be squeaky clean. But hey, let's, as my old boss used to say, inspect what we expect. You're just going in and you're double checking it. It's a business process to check your work on a regular basis because, hey, stuff happens, mistakes are made. And so I would say industry standard is quarterly. You could do it less. You could do it like semi-annually or even annually. To go in and take a look, pull the access, see who has it, and see that it's correct. So the bottom line level of checking you want to do here is just who has access. So like a terminated employee should not have access. That would be probably an exception in your SOC 2 because it's showing that you're not effectively deprovisioning folks. And then a more advanced level is going to be like what level of access they have. Okay. And, you can define this for yourselves, what's functional. I would say, walk before you run, just start somewhere. If you can only check, hey, these people all still work here. And that's what you do in your first year, your first couple quarters, that's fine. Once you kind of have that down, everything's been like tight and clean. If you can start adding criteria to the review to make it stronger, that's a way you can show continuous improvement. And then also the scope of systems. So you're going to have a certain scope of systems that are in scope for your audit. So if you're doing SOC 2, it's typically like your SaaS platform. So all the components of that, the infrastructure, if you have an application running on top of that, the access there. If you have like a database supporting that, the access there. And then it could be, critical security impacting tools for that infrastructure. So if you have like a vulnerability scanner or a logging system or alerting, et cetera, there could be, there could be others. But then you also have business systems. And so you can decide, how broadly do you want to apply this control. In an audit, it's only going to be checked against your defined scope. But as a best practice, you might want to check your CRM or, check something else, right? You could even do rolling ones. If you have 1,000 systems, you're not going to be able to maybe do an access review quarterly in every one. Maybe you do, 25 at a time and roll it by quarter. So all it is to say, you have a lot of flexibility to define how you implement the details of your access review process, but you should really try to start including that as part of your, your business processes as best practice. All right. Provisioning, deprovisioning, and change procedure. The concept here is simply that if people change roles, these sorts of considerations should be looked at again, because if you were an engineer and now you're going to go be a product manager, you might not still need, access to the database directly in your new role. And if you don't review that on change, it's an easy thing for the auditor to flag. And you're like, oh, geez, well, he used to need it, but we just changed his job. Oh, we didn't take away any of these permissions. And if anyone gets miffed about you taking away their permissions, let them know, hey, this is a benefit to you. If you talk to our most senior security folks at Vanta, they don't have access to everything. They don't want access to everything. You know what I mean? So It's a win. If you don't need to use it, you shouldn't have access. All right. Segregation of duties. I mentioned this briefly at the top, but just like with deploying code, the concept here is you shouldn't have one person who has, full access end to end of this process. That's just a weak control. What if they are, corrupt or decide they don't like your company anymore, or they get hacked and that account gets taken over, right? There's a few different use cases where you want some sort of check and balance in here. Good. User responsibility for the management of secret authentication information. This is just simply, you want to communicate to your users kind of responsible best practices, the sort of, don't put your, root password on a sticky note on your computer. You're responsible for maintaining a certain amount of secret information. And if your company provides for a password management tool, that could be a helpful thing. And then you could be more specific and say, talk about how you want them to use the company's approved tooling to manage their secret information. Good?
Yep.
I'll share Okay, information access restriction. This is, again, just more, I would consider like the philosophy around like how you're provisioning things. This is governance language that can be tailored to your organization. I think I've already covered all the concepts here as we've been going through this. Okay, secure logon procedures. We call this out exclusively because it used to be called out in ISO. I have to double check if it's still in the new version. The number one secure logon procedure I'd recommend would be MFA, as we talked about. So it's, having this second factor to log on to a system. There are other things that are common here, and this is more about the technology that's used around actually logging into a system and like best practices here. So for example, if you put in your username and password and you get it wrong, the best practice is for the system to give you limited information about what you got wrong, because if it gives you helpful information, that helps a hacker know, hey, if you put in a username and password and then your password's wrong and the error message comes back and says, hey, that username is fine, but the password's bad. Well, boom, now the hacker knows, hey, now I have a valid username, which they might otherwise have not known. So if you look at very high security systems, and you put in the username and password wrong, it just fails. And like, it lets you start again with no information, which is annoying for the user because they're like, wait, why did that not work? But it's more secure. Other things you'll see, this is probably something you've seen on your banking login, is your last login time, showing you this once you've logged in. The location that you last logged in from, or even on federal systems, sometimes you'll see a banner, like a warning banner, like, hey, if you are a hacker and you're using this system, like, you're going to be guilty of a crime and we're going to prosecute you, something like that. These are all technologies to make the login more secure. Now, none of these per se are specifically required for ISO or SOC 2. This is a risk-based scheme where you set it according to the risk that you have determined as an organization. But that's what it's talking about. Good. All right, password management system. This is a nice to have. It's really like a helpful tool to have if you're managing access in your environment. It is, and Vanta checks for it just as a best practice with our agent. It is not per se a required technology. So if you don't have one, it's okay. Then you should take this out. Okay. Use of privileged utility programs. This is kind of old school, but there are certain programs that themselves have higher access rights. So something like an antivirus program, certain technical programs that you might use to monitor network traffic, packet sniffers, things like this. All it's saying is, hey, these powerful programs should be tightly controlled in your environment, and you should have, some sort of like policy around like what people are allowed to do. Okay, this is also sort of old school from ISO. I'm going to argue it's potentially getting less relevant in cloud-based organizations, but that's the concept. Access to program source code. ISO again calls this out just as a crown jewel that pretty much everyone, if you're coding something or building code, it's one of the things that you need to be protective of. That's it.